My name is Gwendolyn Thaxter. I'm 41 years old, and the last thing I expected when I sat down at that mediation table, with my folder of documents and my dollar store pen, and my heart running at a pace that probably would have concerned me professionally if it had been coming from a patient, was that the man who had spent 11 years quietly convincing me I was bad at managing money would, in the space of 4 hours, prove himself right about exactly one thing. I had been keeping score. I want to tell you about the Tuesday morning I drove 43 miles down Highway 84 through a South Georgia October that couldn't decide if it was still summer, with the folder on the passenger seat and the radio off, because I needed the silence. I didn't know yet what that morning would become. I didn't know that a retired family court judge named Gerald Fitch was already at a desk in an office park in Valdosta, reviewing a supplemental filing that had landed in his inbox before 8:30 a.m. And I didn't know, not the exact number, not yet, that somewhere in a business account under a name I had never heard, there was $67,400 that my husband had spent 2 years making sure I would never find. But I knew the number existed. Llewellyn had told me that much, and knowing the shape of a thing before you can see it clearly is, I have learned, more than enough. Before I take you into that conference room, I want to take a second. If you're watching this from your couch, or while you're doing dishes, or parked in a driveway not quite ready to go inside, I'm glad you're here. If you've ever sat across a table from someone who had more information than you and smiled because they knew it, you're going to want to stay for every minute of this. Hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story, and drop a comment right now. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I genuinely want to know who's in the room with me. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Macon, Georgia, youngest of 3 girls, raised by a woman who cleaned motel rooms for 12 years and loved us as hard as someone can love you when they are running on fumes. My oldest sister, Darlene, was the one who got things. Got the car when she turned 17. Got our mother's signature on a student loan. Got the seat at the kitchen table where the actual family decisions happened. My middle sister Patrice married young and moved to Savannah and called home every Sunday at noon, which I have always thought was the most organized form of love I had ever witnessed. I was the quiet one. I figured out early that asking for things cost something. The look on my mother's face when the math didn't add up. The particular exhaustion of a woman who had already given everything she had and was being asked to reach further. So I stopped asking and started handling. Quietly, privately, without announcement. When I was 13, I found a utility shutoff notice my mother had been hiding in the kitchen drawer for 2 weeks. I stood there and read it and put it back exactly where I found it, and went and got a babysitting job that week. I never told her. The lights stayed on. And I carried something forward from that. A habit, almost, of noticing the routing of information. Where paperwork goes. Which address things are sent to. I developed an eye for that kind of detail the way some people develop an ear for a wrong note. I always thought it was just a quirk. I was wrong about that. I paid for my own school by working morning shifts at a Waffle House 5 days a week and taking night classes at Georgia Piedmont Technical College. And 4 years later, I had an associate's degree in respiratory therapy and $400 in my checking account, and no one who had co-signed a single thing for me. And I thought, this is what I am. Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital hired me 4 months after graduation. I have been there for 11 years. I am good at my job. Specifically, quietly, technically good. And that has always suited me fine. I met Colt Morrow at a church picnic when I was 28. He was funny. He was certain of himself in a way I had never been certain of myself. and I made the mistake of reading certainty as steadiness, which I think is an error a lot of people make about a lot of other people. And I'm not going to spend too long on it. We married 14 months after we met. For a while, it was good. For a while, I thought I'd gotten something right. The first wound wasn't a scene. It wasn't a fight. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, 4 years in, when I asked to see our tax returns because I wanted to understand what we owed, and he handed me a summary. A 1-page document he had typed himself. I said I wanted to see the actual returns. He said, calmly, the way you tell a child that something isn't their concern, "Gwen, there's nothing in there you need to worry about." And I didn't push. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I sat with it for 7 years. If you've ever been handed the summary instead of the source, if you've ever been told what you need to know instead of being shown everything, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is yours too, and you're going to want to be here when the room gets very, very quiet. Llewellyn Draker is 52 years old, and she looks like everyone's most competent aunt. Silver-streaked brown bob, laugh lines, the kind of warmth that makes you tell her things before you've decided to. We met in the alto section of the choir at First Baptist about 3 years ago. She is a senior paralegal at a family law firm in Valdosta, and when I finally told her the marriage was ending, she didn't say, "I'm so sorry," or "Did you see it coming?" She said, "Tell me about the finances." I remember thinking that was an odd response. I understand now it was the only right one. She couldn't represent me. She said that clearly. It would have been a conflict. But what she did was teach me how to read what I was looking at. She once said something to me that I wrote on a list and looked at many times in the months that followed. She said, "Financial fraud in a divorce almost always hides in plain sight. A P.O. box is your first sign. A second entity is your confirmation." I had, at the time, no idea how specific that advice would turn out to be. I filed it away and forgot it, or thought I did. 6 weeks before the mediation, there was a mandatory financial disclosure meeting. His attorney submitted the documents. I sat across the table reading the asset list in real time, and about halfway down the page, I found the Whitmore rental property, the one we bought together in 2019, the one I had co-signed the mortgage for, the one I'd managed tenant calls for 3 years running, listed under Morrow Commercial Tile and Stone, LLC, not under both our names, under the LLC. His attorney was watching my face when I found it. Colt was watching his attorney. And when I didn't react, when I just looked back down at the page, Colt looked at me and smiled. Not a mean smile, a comfortable one. The smile of a man who has already finished the math and is waiting politely for the room to catch up. I got out my legal pad. I wrote one word in the corner, very small. The word was secondary. I didn't know yet what it referred to. I just knew I was looking at something incomplete. That night, I ate cold rice standing at the kitchen counter, and my phone rang at 9:11 p.m. Llewellyn. She said, "Gwen, I need you to not react to what I'm about to say." And I said I wouldn't. And she told me she had run a business entity search on a hunch. She said a name I had never heard, a name that started with Blanchard. And I set my fork down on the counter with both hands, very carefully, because something in her voice told me that what came next was going to change the shape of everything I thought I understood about the last 11 years of my life. The name was Blanchard Property Holdings, LLC. Sole managing member, Colt Devereaux Morrow. Registered address, P.O. Box 144, Albany, Georgia. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, and I felt something happen in my chest that was not quite grief and not quite anger, and was maybe something in between. The specific feeling of a fact landing after years of a suspicion you'd talked yourself out of. Because here is the thing about P.O. Box 144. I had seen that address before. About 2 years ago, trying to forward some renovation invoices for the Whitmore property, I had noticed that the billing address on the management account wasn't ours, wasn't the house address, wasn't the tile company. It was a P.O. box in Albany. I had asked Colt about it. He said it was a business account, cleaner for the accountant. And I had believed him. I had written it off because I was tired and he was confident, and those two things have a long history of combining into something a woman ends up regretting. Llewellyn was still talking. She said, if he set up a separate LLC to hold the rental property, there may be a separate bank account under that entity, a separate account that wouldn't appear on any disclosure he filed under his personal name or the tile company. The question is, how much is in it and how long it's been there? I said, how do we find out? There was a pause. She said, check the property management company's office voicemail. You're still listed as a secondary contact on that account. You never removed yourself when you separated. I think you should check it tonight. I asked, why tonight? She said, because the mediation is tomorrow morning. I want to tell you what it is like to be separated from someone for 14 months and still be tired. Not tired of fighting. I had stopped fighting about 8 months in, when the paperwork started, and I realized that fighting was costing me money I didn't have and ground I couldn't afford to lose. But tired in the deeper way, the way that has nothing to do with sleep. The way that comes from existing in a prolonged state of not knowing what is real. Colt was good at that. Not cruel. I don't want you to picture a cruel man, because cruel men are almost easier to leave. He was managed. Everything was managed. The finances were managed. The narrative was managed. When he told his friends and family that the marriage fell apart because I had withdrawn emotionally, because I'd stopped engaging, because I had chosen my job over the relationship, that too was managed. I heard it secondhand from Patrice, who heard it from someone at our old church, who reported it with the specific gentleness of someone delivering bad news they know is going to land wrong. He told people I had given up. He was not entirely wrong about the timeline. What he did not include was why. There was a hotel receipt in the pocket of a sport coat I pulled from the dry cleaning bag in March of 2023. There was a name on the hotel registration. Her name was not mine. That is the part of the story he managed the most carefully. He cried when I confronted him. He apologized with the specific eloquence of a man who has rehearsed an apology before the incident has occurred. And 2 months later, there was another receipt, this time in the glove compartment. And this time, I didn't say a word. I just called an attorney. But the thing about having your version of events replaced by someone else's, about being told implicitly that you withdrew and gave up and were cold, is that after a while some part of you starts wondering if they're right, if maybe the story they're telling is closer to true than yours. I had 8 months of that. 8 months of going to work, doing my job, eating standing at the kitchen counter, and quietly wondering if I had somehow dreamed the last 3 years of my marriage. There were bad nights. There was a Thursday in January where I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for 22 minutes before I could make myself go inside. There was an unsent text to Colt in my drafts folder that I deleted in February without sending, because I knew if I sent it, I would feel worse, not better. And I had stopped making decisions that would make me feel worse. That was, I think, the moment I understood I had finally run out of grief. What I had left was something colder and more useful. I checked the voicemail at 10:47 p.m. on a Monday night. I dialed the property management company's office line, entered the account code I still had memorized from 3 years of managing tenant calls, and listened. There were 4 messages. 3 were maintenance inquiries, 1 about a water heater, 1 about a loose porch rail, 1 from a tenant asking about a lease renewal. The 4th was left 8 days earlier at 11:22 p.m. The name on the voicemail inbox showed it had been left by a number I recognized, a number I still had in my phone under the name Cult Cell. He had called the property management office line at 11:22 on a Monday night. He had meant, I think, to call his business partner, Wayne Rudd. What he did instead was leave a voicemail in an inbox I was still authorized to access. I listened to it once. I sat very still on my kitchen floor. I don't know when I sat down. I don't remember sitting down. And I listened to my husband's voice. And the word I thought of, the specific word that came to me while he was talking, was secondary. The word I had written on my legal pad 6 weeks earlier. I understood now what it referred to. I listened to the voicemail again. Then I called my attorney's emergency line. Her name is Marian Feltz, and she is exactly as efficient on the phone at 11 p.m. as she is in her office during business hours, which is one of the reasons I paid her flat-rate consultation fees for 1.5 years instead of going with someone cheaper. She told me to come to the office at 7 a.m. She told me exactly what to record, what to transcribe, and what she needed to file before 8:30. I stayed up until 2 in the morning with my phone propped against a coffee mug, playing the voicemail on speaker while I typed out every word on my laptop. I made a list of the things I could verify from what he said. I made another list of the things I couldn't verify and would need the forensic accountant for. When I was done, I made a cup of tea I didn't drink. I sat at the kitchen table in my pajamas, and I thought about P.O. Box 144, and how many times I had walked past information that was telling me the truth. And I thought, this is what it looks like when you weren't ready to know something, and then you become ready. It doesn't announce itself. It just arrives when you finally stop looking away. By 8:30 the next morning, Marian had filed the motion for supplemental financial disclosure. She included a transcript of the voicemail and a digital audio file. She filed it with the Mediator's office and copied both attorneys. At 8:47, Colt's attorney sent her a message that she later showed me. She described it as very short and not particularly professional. She did not share the contents. She said, "He knows." I was already on the highway. The mediation office was in a beige office park off Exit 4, the kind of building that exists to be as neutral as possible. Beige walls, round table, a whiteboard with a cork strip along the bottom edge. I arrived first. I sat in a chair with my back to the window, the way Marian had suggested, so the light would be behind me. I put my folder on the table. I uncapped my pen. I was quiet the way I have always been quiet. Not from fear, not from submission, but from the specific calm of someone who has done the preparation and is now simply waiting for the room to arrive at the same place they are. When Colt walked in with his attorney, Preston Webb, he did not look at me directly at first. He adjusted his jacket. He said something to Webb in a low voice. Then he sat down and he looked at me. And he smiled. I want to describe that smile to you, because I've thought about it a great deal since, and I think it matters. It was not a triumphant smile. It was something more particular than that. It was the smile of someone who has, for so long, been the person in the room with more information, that they have forgotten it's possible for the balance to shift. It was the smile of a man who believed the game was already over because in every version of it he'd ever played, it ended the same way. I did not return it. I looked at the window behind him instead, at the parking lot and the line of Bradford pear trees along the curb, at a crow standing on a speed bump doing nothing in particular. I thought, I drove 43 miles for this. I thought, hold on. Gerald Fitch entered at exactly 9 o'clock. He is the kind of man whose presence organizes a room without him saying anything. Gray-haired, reading glasses on a beaded chain around his neck, a yellow legal pad that he carries everywhere and writes on in very small, very neat handwriting. He had been a family court judge for 22 years before retiring to mediation practice. He had done this approximately 400 times, and it showed in everything. The way he set his materials on the table, the way he asked both parties to confirm they had reviewed the process, the way his face did not change when he opened his folder and found the supplemental filing. He reviewed it for about 45 seconds, while Preston Webb's pen stopped moving, and Colt studied the surface of the table with an expression I did not have a word for yet. Then Fitch looked up. He said, I received a supplemental filing from the Respondents' Counsel this morning. Is everyone aware of this? Preston Webb looked at Colt. Colt looked at Webb. I looked at Gerald Fitch and said yes. Colt said nothing. Webb said, we received it, yes. His voice had changed in some small, specific way. Colt's jaw had tightened by maybe 1 degree. Neither of them looked at me. Fitch said he would need to review the submission and that it would require a brief adjustment to the session's agenda. He said he would need to hear the audio file that had been submitted. He asked if anyone had any objection to that. Webb said he would like a moment to consult with his client. Fitch gave him 3 minutes. Colt and Webb stepped into the hallway. Through the glass panel beside the door, I could see them. Not hear them, just see. And I want to tell you what Colt looked like in that hallway. He looked like a man who had been very certain of a number and has just been told the number is wrong. He was still standing upright. He was still in control of his face. But something behind it had changed, and I could see it the way I can see a patient's oxygen saturation change before the alarm goes off. The small precursor shift that tells you what is coming. They came back. Webb said his client had no objection to the audio being played. He said it in a voice that communicated something different. Fitch nodded and opened his laptop. He found the file. He adjusted the volume. He said, I'll play this once, and then we'll discuss. He pressed play. And in that beige conference room, with the Bradford pear trees outside, and the crow on the speed bump, and the round table we were all sitting at equidistant from one another, I heard my ex-husband's voice come through the laptop speaker.
Wayne, it's Colt. Listen, tomorrow's the day. She's got nothing, man. The Whitmore property's been in the Blanchard Holdings name for 2 years. The Whitmore account's been sitting there since. She doesn't even know it exists. The address is still the P.O. box, box 144. She never asked. By the time she pieces together that there's a second LLC, the clock will run out on her. Make sure the Blanchard Street docs stay under the other name. She's too worn down to chase it. I'll call you after. Bye. The recording was 38 seconds long. I had listened to it 11 times the night before. I knew every pause, every word, the exact pitch of his certainty. But hearing it in that room, through those speakers, with Fitch and Webb and Colt all present, that was something I hadn't prepared for. Not the content, the sound of it landing. The room was very quiet for approximately 8 seconds after the recording ended. I counted them. It is the kind of quiet that you can feel in your sternum. And I want to be honest about what I felt during those 8 seconds, because I have told this story a few times now, and people always assume I felt triumphant.
that I was sitting there watching it unfold with some kind of inner satisfaction. I wasn't. What I felt was something closer to grief, actually. Not for myself. For the specific sadness of watching a man you once believed in become the exact size of what he actually was. I had loved Colt. Not at the end. Not for a long time at the end, but I had loved him when I married him, and I had believed in what I thought we were building. And there is something permanently quiet that happens inside you when you watch proof of the thing you hoped wasn't true arrive in 38 seconds through a laptop speaker. Preston Webb set his pen on the table very slowly. He did not pick it up again. Colt looked at the surface of the table. He did not look at me. Then he said, "That was a private conversation." His voice was flat and measured, the voice of someone choosing their words with enormous care because they understand they are no longer in control of what those words will mean. Gerald Fitch looked at him over the reading glasses that had ended up on his nose at some point during the playback. He looked at him for a moment, in the specific way that retired family court judges look at people who have said something that will not help them. Then Fitch said, "Mr. Morrow, I'm going to need the Whitmore account statements and all documentation related to Blanchard Property Holdings, LLC. We'll take a 30-minute recess." He stood up. He took his yellow legal pad. He left the room. I want to tell you something about the twist seed, this small detail that made all of this possible, because you deserve to know it. P.O. Box 144. I had noticed it 2 years ago when I was forwarding renovation invoices. I had asked Colt about it and filed away his answer. When I told Llewellyn the story of the financial disclosure meeting, I mentioned it the way you mention something you think is irrelevant. Offhand, parenthetical. She looked it up on a business entity database the same afternoon. A woman who had spent 8 years working for a divorce attorney and knew exactly what a P.O. box in a business filing means. The thing that cracked this open was not a dramatic move. It was a habit of noticing. A detail I didn't even remember noticing until I described it out loud to the right person. During the recess, Preston Webb leaned over and spoke into Colt's ear for most of the 30 minutes. I sat at the table. I didn't leave the room. I didn't go to the bathroom. I didn't look at my phone. I opened my legal pad and drew a single horizontal line across the middle of the page, which is something I do when I am waiting. When I have done everything I can do, and now I just have to let the thing I set in motion finish arriving. Colt did not look at me during the recess. He sat beside his attorney and looked at the whiteboard, and at one point he rubbed his face with both hands, slowly, and for a moment, I saw what he actually looked like underneath the performance. Not a villain, not a monster. Just a man who had been very sure of something and had stopped double-checking it, because certainty had always been his method. I did not feel sorry for him. I did not feel satisfied. I felt something more complicated than both of those things. Something like the understanding that it was never personal, that I was not someone he had chosen to harm. I was someone he had chosen not to consider. And that distinction, I think, is its own kind of information. Fitch came back with a second document. The session continued for another hour and 40 minutes after that. There is no dramatic climax to describe in the aftermath. No one crying, no one shouting, no grand pronouncement from Gerald Fitch. What happened in the conference room after the recess was quieter and more procedural, and in some ways more devastating than anything a screenplay would give it credit for. The mediator ordered full disclosure of Blanchard Property Holdings, LLC, and all its accounts. He ordered a forensic accountant. Preston Webb negotiated on Colt's behalf with the specific energy of someone trying to contain a flood that has already started. Professional, rapid, competent at damage control rather than at winning. My attorney, Marion, joined the session by phone for the final 40 minutes, and I sat there and listened to the two attorneys talk about my life in the careful language of settlement agreements. And I thought, this is what it looks like. This is the version of justice that is actually available. It is not dramatic. It is procedural. It lands in documents. I want to tell you what happened to Colt. I want to be fair about this, because fair is the thing I was trying to be the entire time, even when he wasn't, and I see no reason to stop now. The forensic accounting took 6 weeks. The Whitmore account contained $67,400, plus interest accumulated over the 26 months it had existed under the Blanchard entity. The forensic accountant found 2 additional transfers between the accounts that Colt's attorney could not adequately explain. The final settlement gave me 54% of the marital estate, the house equity, my portion of the Whitmore property value, a partial share of the Blanchard account, after Colt's attorney argued successfully that some of those funds predated the marriage. I did not get everything I would have gotten if I had pushed harder earlier, and I am at peace with that. What I got was enough. I got enough to put a security deposit on something better and keep going. I got my name back. I got the ability to look at my own bank account without wondering what part of it I wasn't seeing. I want to tell you something about the drive home, because I think it's the part of the story that's most mine. I stopped at a gas station in Hahira, 40 minutes from the office park, halfway back to Valdosta, and I bought a bottle of water and a package of peanut butter crackers, the kind in the orange cellophane. I sat in the parking lot with the door open because the October air had finally gotten cool, and I ate the crackers one at a time, and I looked at the tree line on the other side of the road, and I did not feel like a woman who had won something. I felt like a woman who had finally gotten back to zero, who had finally gotten back to the place she should have started from, the place where what is hers is actually hers, where the numbers on her own documents mean what they say. There is a difference between winning and getting back what was taken. I don't think I fully understood that difference until I was sitting in a gas station parking lot in Hahira, Georgia, eating peanut butter crackers in the afternoon of the most important day of the last 4 years. Then I called Patrice. She answered on the second ring. I said, "I need to tell you something." She said, "I'm already listening." Colt did not contact me after the mediation. I did not contact him. I heard through Patrice, who heard through someone else, that his girlfriend moved out sometime in December, that she had not known about the LLC, had not known about the hidden account, and had found out in the way that people always find out about these things, through someone who thought she already knew. I did not call to verify this. I'm not sure it matters. What matters is not what happened to him. What matters is what happened to me. And that story is still going. Llewellyn brought me a coffee mug 3 weeks after the settlement was finalized. It has a small brown hen on it and text that reads, "She who is brave is free." It is one of the most aesthetically terrible objects I have ever owned. I have used it every single morning since she gave it to me, and I will use it until the handle breaks off, at which point I will probably glue it back on. When she handed it to me, she said, "You did the work." I said, "You told me where to look." She said, "I told you what a P.O. box means. You were the one who remembered seeing it." We sat at her kitchen table and drank coffee and didn't say a lot more than that, which is the kind of friendship I am deeply grateful for. There were people who came back after the settlement and people who didn't. Colt's family, his mother, his younger brother Terrence, the couple we used to have dinner with on Sundays, they did not come back, and I understand that. They have their version of the story, and it probably isn't mine, and I stopped needing everyone to know my version a long time ago. My sister Darlene called for the first time in 6 months when the settlement was finalized. She said, I should have called sooner. I said, yeah, probably. She laughed. We talked for 40 minutes. It is not repaired, exactly. We are not repair-capable people in my family. But it is open again. And open is something. My sister Patrice called the evening the settlement was signed and said, I always thought there was more going on than he let on. I said, there was. She said, I should have said that sooner. I said, you are saying it now. That was enough. 3 months after the settlement, I sat down one evening and wrote something. Not a letter to Colt. I don't have anything to say to Colt that needs to be said, and silence is not something I am afraid of anymore. What I wrote was a letter to the version of myself who found the utility shutoff notice in the kitchen drawer when she was 13, and put it back and didn't say anything. The version who learned that handling things quietly was the only power available to her. I wrote, you were right that quietness was power. What you didn't know yet is that the thing you were keeping quiet all those years wasn't weakness. It was evidence. And evidence, when you finally know what it means, does not need your help. It speaks. I gave that letter to no one. I folded it and put it in the drawer where I keep my lists. Llewellyn had asked me once, early on, what I was hoping to get out of the mediation. I told her I wanted what was mine. She nodded and said, then that's what we're after. It turns out what was mine was never just the money, although the money matters enormously, and I want to be honest about that. What was mine was the record, the accounting, the room where someone finally put the truth on speaker and pressed play. 4 months after the mediation, I am in the ICU on a Tuesday morning, and a patient's oxygen saturation is at 87%, and I am watching it climb. 88, 90, 92. The way I have always watched those numbers, with both hands in my pockets and the specific calm of someone who has done this before and trusts what the monitor will eventually tell her. My name is Gwendolyn Thaxter. I am 41 years old, and I have spent most of my life being good at things in ways that no one can see. I used to think that was a limitation. Standing in that ICU, watching the number reach 94, I understand it's just the job. And the job doesn't need you to announce it. The job just needs to be done. If any part of this story is yours, if you've ever been handed a summary instead of the document, if you've ever been too tired to push back and wondered later what you missed, I want you to know. The evidence has a longer memory than your exhaustion. Keep your lists. Notice the P.O. boxes. And when you're ready, the room will be there. Hit subscribe if this one reached you, and share it with someone who needs to hear that patient, quiet women are not defeated women. They're just waiting for the right room. I'll see you in the next one. Did not come back, and I understand that. They have their version of the story, and it probably isn't mine. And I stopped needing everyone to know my version a long time ago. My sister Darlene called for the first time in 6 months when the settlement was finalized. She said, I should have called sooner. I said, yeah, probably. She laughed. We talked for 40 minutes. It is not repaired, exactly. We are not repair-capable people in my family. But it is open again, and open is something. My sister Patrice called the evening the settlement was signed and said, I always thought there was more going on than he let on. I said, there was. She said, I should have said that sooner. I said, you are saying it now. That was enough. 3 months after the settlement, I sat down one evening and wrote something. Not a letter to Colt. I don't have anything to say to Colt that needs to be said, and silence is not something I am afraid of anymore. What I wrote was a letter to the version of myself who found the utility shutoff notice in the kitchen drawer when she was 13, and put it back and didn't say anything. The version who learned that handling things quietly was the only power available to her. I wrote, "You were right that quietness was power. What you didn't know yet is that the thing you were keeping quiet all those years wasn't weakness. It was evidence. And evidence, when you finally know what it means, does not need your help. It speaks." I gave that letter to no one. I folded it and put it in the drawer where I keep my lists. Llewellyn had asked me once, early on, what I was hoping to get out of the mediation. I told her I wanted what was mine. She nodded and said, "Then that's what we're after." It turns out what was mine was never just the money, although the money matters enormously, and I want to be honest about that. What was mine was the record, the accounting, the room where someone finally put the truth on speaker and pressed play. 4 months after the mediation, I am in the ICU on a Tuesday morning, and a patient's oxygen saturation is at 87%, and I am watching it climb. 88, 90, 92. The way I have always watched those numbers, with both hands in my pockets and the specific calm of someone who has done this before and trusts what the monitor will eventually tell her. My name is Gwendolyn Thaxter. I am 41 years old, and I have spent most of my life being good at things in ways that no one can see. I used to think that was a limitation. Standing in that ICU, watching the number reach 94, I understand it's just the job, and the job doesn't need you to announce it. The job just needs to be done. If any part of this story is yours, if you've ever been handed a summary instead of the document, if you've ever been too tired to push back and wondered later what you missed, I want you to know, the evidence has a longer memory than your exhaustion. Keep your lists. Notice the P.O. boxes. And when you're ready, the room will be there. Hit subscribe if this one reached you, and share it with someone who needs to hear that patient, quiet women are not defeated women. They're just waiting for the right room. I'll see you in the next one. It not come back, and I understand that. They have their version of the story, and it probably isn't mine. And I stopped needing everyone to know my version a long time ago. My sister Darlene called for the first time in 6 months when the settlement was finalized. She said, "I should have called sooner." I said, "Yeah, probably." She laughed. We talked for 40 minutes. It is not repaired, exactly. We are not repair-capable people in my family. But it is open again, and open is something. My sister Patrice called the evening the settlement was signed and said, "I always thought there was more going on than he let on." I said, "There was." She said, "I should have said that sooner." I said, "You are saying it now." That was enough. 3 months after the settlement, I sat down one evening and wrote something. Not a letter to Colt. I don't have anything to say to Colt that needs to be said, and silence is not something I am afraid of anymore. What I wrote was a letter to the version of myself who found the utility shutoff notice in the kitchen drawer when she was 13, and put it back and didn't say anything. The version who learned that handling things quietly was the only power available to her. I wrote, "You were right that quietness was power. What you didn't know yet is that the thing you were keeping quiet all those years wasn't weakness. It was evidence. And evidence, when you finally know what it means, does not need your help. It speaks. I gave that letter to no one. I folded it and put it in the drawer where I keep my lists. Llewellyn had asked me once, early on, what I was hoping to get out of the mediation. I told her I wanted what was mine. She nodded and said, "Then that's what we're after." It turns out what was mine was never just the money, although the money matters enormously, and I want to be honest about that. What was mine was the record, the accounting, the room where someone finally put the truth on speaker and pressed play. 4 months after the mediation, I am in the ICU on a Tuesday morning, and a patient's oxygen saturation is at 87%, and I am watching it climb. 88, 90, 92. The way I have always watched those numbers, with both hands in my pockets and the specific calm of someone who has done this before and trusts what the monitor will eventually tell her. My name is Gwendolyn Thaxter. I am 41 years old, and I have spent most of my life being good at things in ways that no one can see. I used to think that was a limitation. Standing in that ICU, watching the number reach 94, I understand it's just the job, and the job doesn't need you to announce it. The job just needs to be done. If any part of this story is yours, if you've ever been handed a summary instead of the document, if you've ever been too tired to push back and wondered later what you missed, I want you to know the evidence has a longer memory than your exhaustion. Keep your lists. Notice the P.O. boxes. And when you're ready, the room will be there. Hit subscribe if this one reached you, and share it with someone who needs to hear that patient, quiet women are not defeated women. They're just waiting for the right room. I'll see you in the next one.